All right, so now we can begin. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody in here, or two of you. Welcome to week 2. I suddenly got into these slanty PowerPoints. All right, so today, here's what we're up to. I'm going to talk just real briefly about your reading posts. Then we're okay with the textbook, right? Mark and Diego, good?
I'm expecting mine any day now.
Okay, so today you'll need to work with Diego because we're using the textbook. So you'll need to work page by page through it with him. And then, yeah, then you should be. But yes, you'll need to be bonded together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll also do the preparation for the data analysis one, which is due at the end of week 3. Okay, so we're going to do a bit of practice. So everybody's reading post was great. Some really lovely summaries. Each one is worth 2 points. It's on your, and everybody did fantastic. I would only drop you a point if, well, you wrote a couple of sentences or something like that instead of did a proper post. There were very nice summaries and no one indicated any confusion. So I assume no one online indicated any confusion and no one in class. So I assume we are all not confused. Or if we are confused, we don't know that yet. All right, okay. Great. Just an FYI, a couple of people included citations. If it's a full citation, a proper citation, as in, you know, John Smith 2012, and you put that in your entry, you know, in your post, you do need to put a bibliographic reference at the end. It's just a good habit to get into. If ever there's any citation in your piece that you write, make sure that you've done a full bibliographic entry at the end. Good. Next week, we're actually going to have a discussion post. They're all called reading posts, but some of them will be discussion posts where you'll all talk to each other, and some of them are straight reading posts where you just write and then turn it in. Okay. But next week, this coming week, you'll all be talking to each other. All right. So chapter 1 is, for those of you that have read it, oh, sorry, and I meant to go back and say that I really enjoyed the introductions, everybody. There was 2 people who didn't introduce themselves, so go ahead and put yourself on there, but it was really good to hear from everybody out there. And interestingly, we were they were getting into a thing about who was the oldest. So somebody claimed being the oldest at 51, and then we have a couple of people who are definitely older than, who said, no, we're older than 51. So this is the first time I've been involved in anything where people are sort of saying, no, I'm older than you, but that's great. All right, chapter 1, when you read it, if you haven't read it already, is pretty straightforward. I hope it should be full of stuff that you've done in 555 and 501 and other classes. I do want to make one thing clear, though, not that anyone said this, but sometimes it comes up. I've included a quote here from Chomsky, which is in your chapter. So, quote, when we study human language, we are approaching what some might call the human essence, the distinctive qualities of mind that are, so far as we know, unique to humans, unquote. So the reason I've focused on this is because, yes, there's this idea of animal language, right? So we've all heard that dolphins are communicating with each other, whales are communicating with each other, bees dance to communicate with each other. You know, we have the history of bonobo studies where they are working with them. So we don't want to confuse basic communication with what we're calling language in this course. Now, you can have a philosophical debate about what you want to call language. That's fine. But in this class, we call language this architecture, this creative architecture of the mind, right? So in other words, the ability to use a finite creative system to do infinite amounts of communication. I'll say that again. In other words, the finite system that we can use to create infinite amounts of communication. So if you want to think about it in a way, yes, whales, dolphins might say to each other, you know, someone's sick or danger or whatever, but what they can't do, we assume, I guess we don't know, but what they don't do is have a system of symbols that then can be used creatively for infinite communication. So think, for example, of syntax, right? So we have a finite set of morphemes, grammatical rules, and with that we can create infinite amount of sentences. Okay, so when we talk about language, we're talking about that ability, right? So if you think of someone like Jeannie, who we talked about, remember what we said last week, that was the one thing that she couldn't do was that syntactic organization, right? So you couldn't give her a basic question structure and she could actually put everything in the right place. But she could understand vocabulary and she could communicate to you that she wanted to eat or whatever. So that's the difference. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So in that sense, we're talking about the linguistic systems that make up language. So we've got phonology, which is the system of, what is phonology the system of? Sound. We've got morphology, which is the system of word units, so word meanings, word units, I guess I want to say, syntax, which is, right, so sentence structure, right? Semantics, which is meaning, and pragmatics, which is meaning and context. Very nice, Diego. Awesome. So essentially, chapter 1 gave you definitions of all those things. And I'm not going to define them again because at this point you should know them. If you don't know them, let me know. I'll answer a question on a virtual office, but generally speaking, we should have covered this by now. Okay. Then it moves into non-native knowledge, right? So whatever it is the non-native speaker knows. Now, if we go back here, we know that the non-native speaker also knows all this in their language, right? So remember, we're assuming not simultaneous bilinguals, but sort of an adult learning a second language, right? So the question is then, as this person moves from L1 to L2, L3, L4, whatever it is that you want to do, what is happening inside their brain? And the first thing that we talked about last week was interlanguage, right? Which was what? Where did interlanguage come out of Mark and Diego, you're totally on the spot here because there's only you two. So do you remember what model it came out of? Why were we suddenly interested in that?
It came out of the studies where it was found that children and adults learn new grammar structures or just language structures in general, seemingly at a specific time and a specific
Good, that's definitely part of it. So part of it is we should be able to see some kind of development across time that's systematic.
And interlanguage was basically the outcome of that, of the language that language learners create that is in between their native language and the target.
Right, and what model did that come out of? It came out of the model after contrastive analysis.
Error?
Yes, good. So the idea was that when you look at learners' language through error analysis, what we expect to find, we've discovered, is some kind of systematic interlanguage. And depending upon where you slice that learner's language, you should be able to see some systematic things happening. And when we talk about transitional grammars, which is the other word for interlanguage, we mean, of course, all grammars, okay? We mean all linguistic systems, not, so we want to stop confusing grammar with syntax, right? Whenever we say grammar in second language acquisition, we mean any linguistic system, okay? Not just syntax. Although most of the work has been done on syntax, but whatever. The second concept that's important is what we have is these transitional grammars. Sadly, for most learners, we don't go transitional, 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 perfect, right? What happens to most second language learners as an adult? They don't end up with a perfect second language system, right? What do they end up with? An imperfect one, right? Some kind of imperfect system, right? Now, the imperfection may be syntax related, it may be phonologically related, morphologically related, it may be a little bit of everything, but what you end up with is some kind of imperfect system. Now, back in the day, that imperfect system was called fossilization. Okay, fossilization basically means permanently established deviant forms. Okay, so as a second language speaker of, say, English, I don't know if you have, Shihun, any permanently established deviant forms that you can think of, but essentially it's the idea that you reach you've sort of reached learning saturation point, but there's still some ongoing sort of trenchant errors that make you different from a native speaker. There's been a lot of debate over fossilization, particularly in the last 10, 15 years, because it's very difficult. It assumes that there comes a certain point where you stop learning, right? And it's hard to make that assessment, particularly when we have hardly any longitudinal data on this. And what's longitudinal data? What do I mean by that?
A long period of time.
Yeah, so we don't have very many studies of language learners that span 20 years. So how do I know that it's a permanently deviant form? Like Shihun might have a currently deviant form, and if I came back to him in 10 years' time, he's sorted out his deviant form. He might have something else, but who knows? The point is, you can't, it's very difficult to empirically pin down when this happens. What we do know is that for most people, there's some kind of stabilization at some point, right? So that's why we've moved, for those of you that might have done this before, that's why we've moved from the term fossilization to stabilization. Because fossilization implies it's over, right? You stand no chance ever of changing that language form. What we know from some longitudinal data in phonology and so on, that isn't true. You can move. Now, you don't necessarily move all the way to the perfect form, but you can still keep moving. So, but what happens to most of us is we go through some kind of stabilization where pretty much if you're communicating Shihan, for example, on a day-to-day basis, he's got a sort of stable idea of grammar and pronunciation, and he's using that consistently, and it may or may not contain some deviant forms. Okay, so if you check on page, those of you at home, you're going to need your book for this whole class, so you want to grab that right now. What I want to make sure is that you understand this points to remember, and on page 12 through 13. So we've got SLA, native language, target language, basic linguistic concepts, and non-native speaker knowledge. Anything anyone has any questions about? All right, as I say, let me know online if you do. What we're going to spend the rest of today doing is looking at interlanguage forms and preparing you to do your data analyses. So you have 3 data analyses across the semester. And very straightforwardly, what I'm going to make you do is look at learner data and say, can I see, what can I see? Can I see some kind of transitional grammar? Okay. Can I see some systematic patterns and or some places where they're not systematic patterns? And every time we do this, we do the exact same thing. So once we've gone over a couple and you've done your first one, you'll do your second one and your third one. It's always the same thing. This idea of taking data, picking out one part of that data and having a look and seeing what you can see. So before we start doing our first data analysis, let's look at a couple of fundamental sort of tenets, the reason we're doing it. The idea is that when you take a linguistic system at any given time, so you just take a slice of time out of the learner, there will be some systematicity. In other words, learners will be working from some kind of idea of what they think the grammar is, okay? It won't be a completely random set of rules that they're using, right? Whether that system comes from their L1 or some kind of transitional understanding they have of the grammar is a whole other thing, right? That's what you're going to investigate. That's what you're looking to see where you think it might come from. But it's the system that you're looking for, all right? What is it systematically that you're seeing reproduced? And the second one is that we would expect this across all language systems. Phonology, morphology, syntax, pragmatics, and semantics, which I've forgotten. We're going to focus initially on syntax, as that's where much of the work has been done. So the 2 examples we're going to look at today, and the example that you're going to do in class today and you guys are going to do at home, is syntax. And then the first data analysis you have due at the end of week 3 is also going to be syntax. Okay? All right. So we're going to follow the basic steps every time, and this is where you need a book. So Mark and Diego, you need to be able to see, because what I'm doing is taking the example out of the book and going through it with you. So each time you do these data analysis, you follow essentially the same thing. And the first step is describe the data. Okay, you have to do a data description. So right now I am on page 18, where it says data set 1 plurals. Have you got that, guys? Okay. So every time you do this, these are the first set of questions you ask yourself. What's the data focus? In this case, it's plurals. What we're looking at is to see if there's any systematicity in this learner's use or these learners' use of plurals. You always have to pick something. You can't just say, well, is there any systematicity anywhere, right? Because you're going to be looking at everything's everywhere. So you want to pick something that you're looking at, pick a feature. In this case, a syntactic feature is plurals. Where does it come from? Sorry, this has redone itself. Oh, I forgot it did that. Go that back. No, sorry. All right. What's the data focus? Plurals. Where does it come from? It comes from 3 adult, and this is all information I've taken from the book. It comes from 3 adult speakers of Arabic, writing and speaking data, and we don't know if it's from the classroom or not because we've not been given that information. Okay. How much data do you have? How much data are you working with? In this case, you've got 19 examples of plural usage. Again, we don't know which ones are from speaking and which ones are from writing. We haven't been given that information. Do we know anything about the NL? What's the NL? Native language. Good. In this case, no. Okay. In this case, in this example in the book, we have been given no information about what happens in Arabic with plurals. Okay. Now, when you do your first data analysis, you'll see you will have some information about the native language, which is Japanese and Norwegian. But in this case, we don't. Okay. Do we know anything about the target language? Well, yes. Because the target language is English, right? So yes, Diego, you do know something about it. You know how plural rules work in English, right? You might not know them all, but you know what's grammatical and ungrammatical, okay? That's your data description. So before you do anything else, you want to make sure that you've got that down, all right? Then you want to categorize the data. And you're categorizing it into English-like and non-English-like and ambiguous if there's something that's ambiguous. So at this point, you want to look at table 2.2 on page 19. Okay. Actually, let's just flip straight to 2.3. Let's go straight to table 2.3, which is on page 20. Are we there? All right. See, here you've got your 19 sentences or utterances, and they're divided into places in which the plural is correct and places in which it is incorrect. Okay. So, English-like, 2 deserts, the streets, the avenues, 4 days, its boundaries, many people, 100 years, many tents and goats, 2 mountains, 200,000 telephone lines. Okay, that is all grammatical, right? It's English-like. So this is the patterns you're looking at in the data. What is grammatical and what is ungrammatical? Okay. Then the second, the middle one, is non-English-like. Tolu, do you have your book, your textbook? Okay. Non-English-like, a couple of towels, how many ticket, many kind of way, a few months, a lot of mosquito, 9 months, 1.5 million inhabitant, how many hour, 3 or 4 kind of bread. Okay, can you see why they're non-English-like? Right, they're incorrect. Okay, why do you think the last one is in ambiguous? That's right, because yeah, it's half right and half wrong. The month is wrong, the years is right, right? So then once you've divided it, you say, can I see, as I look at this division, we're on page 20, Tolu, can I see any patterns?
Using the singular form of
Okay, so the non-English like, so what's the difference between the, you see any pattern in what they're getting correct?
Oh, I'm sorry.
The English like, and what they're getting, that's okay, that's why we're doing it in class, in what they're getting incorrect in the non-English like. Can you see any general patterns? No. Okay, that's okay. Takes time to look at 2, 4, 2, 200,000. They're all in the English like.
What is 2 words he manages to put up? You know, like the avenues.
Okay.
It's like a phrase, a few months.
Good. All right, you're so close. Yes. If there's a number, a numerical number, 1 or more, they seem to get it right. That it's a plural. They have to put a plural. So we've got 2 deserts, or deserts, I guess. No, deserts. 4 days, 100 years, 2 mountains. Okay. Many tents and goats. Now, what happens if you have a quantifying phrase? Yeah, right. It looks like they lose it. They then seem to think that the plural is in the quantifying phrase instead of in the noun, right? Because they say a couple of towel. How many ticket? Many kind of way. A few months. A lot of mosquito. We'll come back to 9 months. We'll come back to 1.5 million. How many hours? 3 or 4 kind of bread. Do you see this general pattern? Okay, so that is the first general pattern you spot, which is I've written right here. Whenever there's a quantifying phrase means kind of, couple of, sort of, not sort of, but kind of, kinds of, couple of, few of, or non-numerical quantifying word, like kind and so on, they seem to think that then you don't need an S on the noun, right? Maybe because they think that the plurally part has already been taken care of in the, so you're like, well, not a bad start, okay? I'm looking for something, not a bad start. So then what you want to do is say, if this is my hypothesis, because that's what you're basically doing, what fits and what exceptions are there? So I said we're going to have to come back to a couple, right? So 9 months, does that fit or not fit? Doesn't fit, right? Because if it's a 9, it should be 9 months, right? What other one doesn't fit? Good. Why doesn't that fit, Diego? Yeah, good. It's a number. So why did they get that wrong? Okay. So then if you look at page 21, they talk about those, and this is where you do the fit and exceptions thing, okay? So the first one they talk about is 213, which is 1.5 million inhabitant. So they say, I'm now at the top of page 21, do you see? They say 213 can be analyzed as, is it numerical or is it a phrase? So because it's such a long phrase, 1.5 million, potentially the learner is confusing this with something like kind of or many of. Do you see what I mean? So you can sort of make that fit. Now, 214 is ambiguous because you've got it incorrect on month, but correct on years. So what does that maybe tell you about 211?
Could have just been a careless error.
Yes, but if it was careless, we would think it was random, right? We're not looking for random. We're looking to think. So
You might think that month is some sort of irregular or something.
okay, we're getting closer. So what they suggest in 211.1 is that the pronunciation difficulty is so much because months, you have to do months, is so much that they simplify it. They simplify the phonology down, and because it's just too complicated. And you know, that would make sense of the fact that every time month appeared, it was wrong, right? So even though 9, we would think that 9 month would end up in the English like, right? Because it's just a numerical number, but it's not, it's ended up in the non-English like. It would also make sense of the ambiguous one because they got years correct, but they messed up months because they're never saying months properly because it's too complicated. So we could speculate that this was spoken data. Now, remember what we said when we described the data? We don't know which one is spoken and which one is writing. It comes from both. But one thing that we could say about this data is this part would make sense if that was spoken data and they were simplifying the phonology. Make sense? Okay, then they have 14. 214. Wait, that was 211. Yes. Okay. Again, I said it might be the month thing. 210. 210. Many people, many ideas. So what's the difference in, so this is, again, this is not a number, right? This is a quantifying word, many. What's the difference in the many that they get right in 215 and the many that they get wrong in 24 and 217? Say that again. How? How is one difference. Oh, wait. How is the difference? No? Okay, and then 2-4 as well. You're right, Mark. If you take how many or many kind, which is in 2-4, these then become phrases, right? As opposed to the single many. So this is, again, what Diego said. In these cases, they're now looking more like phrases rather than like individual counting words, okay? So again, we can speculate that 210, many people, many ideas, they're treating that like 10 ideas, 9 ideas. But as soon as you turn it into a phrase, a quantifying phrase, many kinds of, or how many, that then turns it into a different, qualitatively different syntactic thing, right? So that is how you do data analysis. You look at the fits, you look at the exceptions, you then say, well, can I make something here? You know, I mean, I don't want to have completely, you can't just say for each sentence, well, that's randomly different, that's randomly different, that's randomly different, right? It's like, how can I make sense? How, if I slice these three learners' language open, what might be the transitional grammar at this point? As you can see, you have to look very carefully. Yes, Diego.
How many pieces, how many examples do we need before we can say this might actually carry some weight?
That is an excellent question. The last thing that you do as part of your data analysis is you say, what more data would I need to support my hypothesis? So if this was my hypothesis, the hypothesis we just came up with of what's happening with this, the first thing we would need is to know the difference between written and oral. So the next set of data I collected from these three Arabic guys, I would need to say, is this written data or is this oral data? Because if it was written data and they're still doing the month thing, that's less clear, right? But if it's spoken data, they just can't say months, then awesome, right? The second one we would need, and this is to help us with 1.5 million month or years, is more data with conjunctions, right? So more data with numerical phrases with conjunctions to see if every time he did 1 and, you know, or 600 and, you know, he did that singular. The other thing with this particular set of data is when we went up to the top, we said there were 3 adults, right? So another thing would be if we could split these 3 adults and find out, you know, who's making what errors, okay? But in general, the more general answer to your specific question is, does it seem linguistically reasonable, right? Or does it seem like I'm making something up out of pure air, right? In this case, the hypotheses that are in here that they've done seem linguistically reasonable, okay? And again, notice we're not saying we know exactly what's going on. We're saying that this is what we think the transitional grammar is. And these are the extra data we would need in order to help our analysis move forward. So describe data, categorize data, look at fit and exceptions. What more data do you need? 4 steps, okay? Yeah? Any other questions right this second? Okay, let's look at one more example. Then we'll take a break and you'll do an example yourself, okay? So this data is the second data set from your book. And it is on page, it starts on page 23 and goes to 24, okay? So first of all, what's the focus? Okay, remember you have to have a feature to focus on. You don't just look at the whole sentence and say, let me look at every single thing. You say, what am I interested in? In this case, we're interested in correct and incorrect uses of ing, right? So where does the data come from? In this case, it's 1 adult Arabic speaker. Again, I'm getting all this information from the book. I'm not making it up. 1 adult Arabic speaker. It's all spontaneous speaking. And we don't know if it's from the classroom or not because it doesn't tell us that, okay? How much data do you have? You have 10 examples of usage, right? Goes to, so now I'm on page 24, okay? Do we know anything about the native language? In this case, we don't. We haven't been told. Now, when I say this, you might know something about it, but you have to be very careful when you're doing data analysis not to go down that rabbit hole. Because second language data analysis, error analysis, you should be able to do regardless of whether you know the language or not, okay? So you might end up saying this may be a first language interference or not, but remember only roughly 33% of errors are related to the first language. So we don't want to be in a situation where we're saying this must be an error that's based on the first language, okay? Notice that we didn't say that with the Arabic because we didn't know. It might be that in Arabic, for example, if you have a quantifying phrase in Arabic, you don't mark the noun for plural. I don't know, that may be true. That's not, because we had no information about the first language, we're not going to go there, okay? Okay. Do we know anything about the target language? Yes, right? We know how ING rules work in English. So we know what's correct and incorrect, okay? All right, what's our next step? Describe the data is step 1. What's step 2? Well done, Mark. Yeah. Categorize the data. Now, that might have been what you meant, but I've noticed that when students do this, they often miss this step. They just start looking at it as a group of data and they don't categorize it. And it's much easier and you won't miss stuff if you go ahead and categorize it. So here it is. It's categorized into English-like and non-English-like, okay? So take a look at that. Now, Diego, now you're looking for possible patterns of fit. Now, when you're looking for possible patterns of fit, just like start writing down anything that you see. You're not looking for a golden egg, okay? That's not how second language analysis works. You just start writing down anything that you see that looks like it might be systematic. So what kind of things might we say?
The speaker learner uses the appropriate ING form when dealing with the pronoun.
Okay, good. Yes. One thing we can say is that every time there's a pronoun, they've got it right. Excellent. Now, there's one exception to that, which is what? Hanny's sleeping. Right. So, yes, we've got that one right. There's every time there's a pronoun, but we know that there might be something else going on because Hanny is still in there. Because the other time we see Hanny, it is non-English like, right? So we put that to one side, but yes, that's good. What else? What other patterns do you see?
If there's a direct object.
Diego, maybe this is your thing. You're going to be a second language analyst. That's very good. If there's a direct object, what do they seem to do?
Omit.
Right. Turn it into a present simple, right? Now there's there's absolutely no exceptions to that, okay? There's no place where there's a direct object where it appears in the English-like. But there is one where there's no direct object and it's still in the non-English-like. And what's happening there?
There's no grammar or subject. With watch TV, is that what we're talking about?
No, sorry, you're right. Though there's two. Yeah, well, watch TV, read, drink. No, I'm not talking about those. What's the one I'm talking about? Like, you're right here. Check, 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 check. What doesn't check on your hypothesis?
Oh, eating.
Eating, right? This doesn't check, okay? This one, it's in non-English like, but it doesn't match your nice hypothesis, right? But what else is going on with that one? There's an article. What else? How do you make the ing tense?
You add INGs.
What else do you do?
You need a helper verb.
You need a be verb, right? You have to say be plus ing, right? So is sleeping, is raining, is eating. So what's the problem with this one? What's missing? Is, right. So this isn't actually English-like in the same sense as these, because there's a missing z, right? So now, as this is, was this written or spoken data? We do know, actually. Yeah.
Spoken.
Yes, good. So as this was spoken data, then it may be that this has just gotten lost, right? That as he's speaking, he's just sort of lost that z sound, dogs eating. So it's been categorized, transcribed and categorized as dog eating, which has put it in non-English like, okay? Another possibility is that Mark, I think, said this, that there's an article and a noun, and that's not the same as any of these, right? So it doesn't look like either a single pronoun or a proper noun, so he's not quite sure what to do with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I lean towards the inadvertent verbal error, just because for a non-native speaker, it just seems like G followed by Z is more difficult.
I frankly, because it's spoken data, so Mark is saying that he leans towards just the accidental omission of the S, dogs, and I tend to agree with you. And that's at least, I mean, one of the reasons that you can speculate that that's likely is because it's spoken data. Yeah. So if it was sleeping, if it was written data, and every single time he remembered the, you know, apostrophe S, then that would be less easy to propose. So what we've ended up with, did I actually write this down? Oh yeah, these are the patterns. Oh, I don't know why I'm saying he, it's a she. These are the patterns that we've sort of ended up with. So if you were doing a data analysis of this group of data, this is what I would be looking for. And notice this question mark. You don't know. You're just going from the data that you have. Okay. But all these patterns with the fit and exceptions make some kind of sense. Okay. So she only uses V, ing if it's sentence final. That accounts for all of the data. Okay. Except for the, you know, the one that we didn't. No, wait, sorry. That accounts for that data too. That accounts for the dog eating as well, because that's sentence final, right? So we can say that if it's sentence final, she's quite happy to use be plus ing, right? But there looks to be some kind of problem if there's a direct object, which is what Diego said. Potentially there's the difference between transitive and intransitive sentences, right? So if it's a transitive, has an overt object, do not use ing. If it's intransitive, use ing. Okay, that takes care of everything except for that one, 2.25. And we're going to speculate that that one may actually have nothing to do with grammar, but to do with pronunciation. And here's the last one we said, which Mark had said, another possible exception for this one, the dog eating, is because there are two words, the plus dog, rather than one unanalyzed chunk. And the unanalyzed chunk is he's, she's, it's, he's, Hanny's. Does that make sense? All right. So you could write, I would expect you, if you were doing this analysis, to write all these possibilities. These are the patterns you've seen. These patterns make linguistic sense because transitive versus intransitive, as you know, whether it's something takes a direct object or not, is a very universal linguistic characteristic. So suggesting that they might be using that is not a problem. Suggesting that they might be using unanalyzed chunks is also very normal. Okay, so what more, step 4, what more data would you need to do this analysis, right? So if we went with these patterns, one thing we would need is more transitive sentences, right? Because we'd have to see if every time you had a transitive sentence, read the paper, drink the coffee, watch the TV, that you had the same issue, right? Another one would be more sentences using overt subject with an article. So in other words, we know that they're fine with pronouns and proper nouns as long as they're attached as a chunk, but we could use seeing some more of these, right? Where they're not, to see if there was anything to do with the unanalyzed chunk versus when you break it down into an article and a noun. And that would give you that. And you're done. How you do? So, a couple of things. One is data analysis requires that you look really carefully. That's why you're supposed to categorize everything carefully. If you try and do this in a rush, you're going to miss a load of stuff and it's not going to be pretty, okay, when I grade it. The other thing is you've got to think just a little bit about syntax, about the grammar. Okay, you gotta be looking at the forms and saying what's happening in English. You gotta be able to break things down like we did with this. You know, this is now a chunk. Pronoun plus be verb plus ing, right? And you gotta be thinking about it that way. All right, you gotta be breaking it down and thinking about it that way, rather than thinking about it in meaning or in. You've really got to start thinking about what it is the learner is producing as compared to what the learner would produce. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
The 4 steps again.
The 4 steps are right here. Describe. That means all the information you have about the data set itself. Okay. Is it written? Is it spoken? Is it one person? Is it 21 people? Is it kids? Is it adults? Is it in the classroom? Is it not in the classroom? Do you have any information about the native language? The native language of the learners, or you don't? Okay. That's your first one. Remember, this PowerPoint is also up for you, so you can go back and review it. Step 2, categorize the data. Don't forget this step. Even if it's a small amount of data, if you don't do this step, you'll miss stuff. So at this point, it's kind of like when your teacher says, I don't just want to see the answer, I want to see you work the problem. When you do data analysis, I want to see you work the problem. If I don't see your categorization, then I assume that you haven't done it. Okay? And that's going to be a problem. Step 3, look for any patterns, fit and exceptions. Okay? Remember, you're not looking for the golden egg. It's not necessarily a fantastic fit that will fit absolutely everything, but you're looking for something that makes linguistic sense. And last one, based on your hypotheses, based on the fit and exceptions, what more data would you need to work through, to help you show that your hypothesis is correct? Yeah? Okay. Everybody at home, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to do a data analysis. People in the class, the students in the class here, are going to do that data analysis, and then we're going to go over it. At home, you will find that data analysis in your doc share, and it's called Data Analysis Sample Without Answers. Yeah. Yes, it's called Data Analysis Sample Without Answers, and it's in your doc share. So while we take a little break and then we work on the data before we go all over it together, you can go ahead and start doing that. And you want to do the exact same thing that we just did. Look at the data and you take the 4 steps, okay? All right, so now we're going to have a little break.